About 3 months ago, the Tri-Cities Civil War Roundtable had a guest speaker. Mr. Richards and I thought enough of it that we wanted to try to get him back, started working on him. Mr. Addington finally found the slot that they could agree on and time slot, and then Addington decides that it's more important to go see it new grandbaby. So I get to introduce him again. He did a wonderful job, and y'all will be amazed at the in-depth history that he tells us about in first person about somebody from our area and what we went through during the Civil War. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lucas Wilder. He is a historian and public interpreter whose work focuses on the Civil War in Appalachia, with particular attention to mountain warfare, borderland, loyalties, and the lived experience of the ordinary people caught between the armies. He earned his PhD in Civil War history from Mississippi State. Don't hold that against him. He's portraying Daniel Ellis, a Union scout whose wartime service relied on local knowledge, endurance, and intimate familiarity with the rugged terrain of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Through this portrayal, Wilder blends the scholarly research with first-person interpretation to illuminate how the war was experienced beyond the battlefield in the hills, hollows, and back roads of the southern mountains. Now, Dr. Wilder here, Lucas, is actually a ranger at the National Park Ranger at the park over at Cumberland Gap. So if you haven't been over there, and I spent some time in Middlebury, it's a wonderful place to visit. There are beautiful trails. Is the cabin still up next to Hensley Settlement that you can rent or make available, whatever?
No longer available to rent, but
no
still
longer
there.
Available to rent, but it's still up there. Okay, it's a trip, and then you come down at Sand Caves. It's a long, hard trip, but it is a beautiful trip. This little guy sitting over here has over 70,000 followers on his Facebook page, on all of his pages. It's History Gone Wilder is how you find it. And at this point, would you join us there, Mr. Wilder, and become your first person?
Well, it's wonderful being back in East Tennessee. It's always glad to be home, glad to always be at home in these mountains. I know you probably get a lot of veterans like me coming out and telling you about the time and their late unpleasantness that was called the Civil War. Most of these veterans are probably talking about their role in the great battles: Gettysburg, Spotsylvania Courthouse, Fredericksburg, Shiloh, Stones River, and Vicksburg. And I'll have to say I wasn't in any of those. So don't expect any grand battle strategies or me to explain why one general should have done another. I was on the front lines, very much in the front lines, but I didn't put on a blue uniform. That's why I don't like wearing a uniform quite often, because most of my service in those 4 years, I didn't need to wear a jacket, or I would have been shot, for one thing. So I'm just happy that you all want to hear some of these stories, especially since it's in your own backyard. My name is Daniel Ellis. I was born in Carter County, Tennessee, and I was very troubled when the Civil War broke out. When it broke out, these secessionists in Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama decided to break away from the Union. But I always had a connection to the Union. I'd fought in the Mexican War, although I fought more stomach problems in Mexico than I did the enemy. But I always had an attachment to the Union. So when Tennessee breaks away, I had no attachment to this new country that had arose in my home. And so I wanted to fight for the Union. But there's no place to join up. I was in East Tennessee. I was in enemy territory. How could I join the Union Army? Well, me and others, we decided that we would try to fight back in our own way. Fight back in our own way against the Confederacy. And the way we decided to do this was we came together, these East Tennessee Unionists, and we sent an envoy to Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States. We wanted him to help us get out from under oppression. We were being beaten, murdered, and ran out of the state for our loyalty to the United States. We didn't want to be labeled as outlaws, but for 4 years, I was an outlaw right where I'm standing right now. We sent an envoy to Lincoln and asked him for help, and he said he would. He gave us some money to help us with an operation, and what we planned to do was between Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Bristol, Virginia, there are 9 railroad bridges on the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad. In early November 1861, it was our plan to burn those 9 railroad bridges. When those bridges were burned, that meant that the Confederacy would lack infrastructure. They couldn't send troops rapidly to the region, and a Union army was going to come through the Cumberland Gap and capture East Tennessee and help us, relieve us of this oppression we've been going through. The man that was in Kentucky that was supposed to send that army was a man named William T. Sherman. He commanded Kentucky at the time. And so in early November, me and many other brave East Tennesseans came together and we burned the bridges. My bridge was not too far away from here that I was supposed to burn. We only get 5 of those 9 railroad bridges burned. Only 5 of them. But that did destroy a lot of infrastructure. But no army came. We were left, abandoned. Sherman said he would have needed 200,000 men to have invaded East Tennessee. Later, he would go on to tell his superior, Ulysses S. Grant, that East Tennessee is my horror. He hated the mountains, and he wouldn't send an army into them. And that's where our story begins. When no army came to relieve us, no army came to protect us, that left the Confederacy to round us up, and many of my good friends would be executed for their role as a bridge burner. Being labeled a bridge burner meant being labeled an outlaw, meant being hunted like an animal constantly. They were hung from trees next to the railroad so that Confederates could hit them with sticks as they rode by on the train. That's what it was like in East Tennessee during these 4 years. Me and a few others were able to get away. We hadn't been captured. We were hiding up near Bays Mountain at the time. And all of a sudden, we get found out. Our position gets tipped off. We split up. I hope that some of my friends got away. And as I'm hiding up in Bays Mountain, I look out into the valley south of me. I can see a whole group of my friends coming towards me. I'm thinking, wonderful. This is great. They might have been scattered from that scare, but now we're coming back. So I walk down off the mountain and join them. And as I join them, I realize it's not just them. They have been rounded up and caught. Confederates and cavalry and infantry were guarding them as they were walking up the valley. They took me as a prisoner. They labeled me as a bridge burner. I probably would have gotten away, but someone in the crowd identified me. They took me to a home, and the officer there in command said that he was going to plan on executing me as soon as he possibly can, and as soon as he can get some witnesses to verify that I was one of the bridge burners. As I was being detained by one of these officers, I claimed I needed some water. I was a little parched. And without even getting permission, I left and started walking towards a cabin where I knew there was a bucket of water hanging and a ladle to be able to drink out of. I get there and I don't stop. I keep going. I go through the house. I go to the other side of the house and I can see a cedar thicket not too far away. As soon as I pass the door, I jump over the fence. I can hear my mud squishing to the boots. My boots squishing to the mud. And I run up into the cedar thicket, and I can hear horses and men going all over me. I move slowly because I know if the branches break, then they'll know where I've went. And so I have to move slowly once I hit the cedar thicket, but I'll wind my way up in through the cedar thicket, and I sit still. It seemed like an eternity. And in reality, it was somewhere around 6 hours I waited in that cedar thicket, waiting for them to finally leave. But eventually I started hearing them drift away, and they were gone. I got myself ready, and I knew I had a stop to make before I tried to make it to freedom, which freedom to me was Kentucky. If I can get to Kentucky, I can get to freedom. But I had to go back home. I have a wife and a few children at home. And so I have to sneak into my own house. I go to my wife, tell her goodbye, kiss my children and my wife goodbye, and I have to leave because they know where I live. They knew who I am. They probably are going to patrol it. That's why I snuck into my own house, and I made off for Kentucky. Once in Kentucky, I found Union recruitment camps. Finally, the United States had control over a position not too far away from East Tennessee, and I was able to go and talk with these men. They wanted me to join, but I felt I had a much larger role than to simply join a regiment, which I didn't know would take me into home or not. My goal was to go back and get those East Tennesseans that were being oppressed, being beaten, murdered, ran out of the state for their homes because they are loyal to the United States. And that's what I did. I went back. I didn't stay in Kentucky. I went back into East Tennessee, winding my way over the mountains, and I'm going to share a few stories about my time as a pilot, guiding these East Tennessee Unionists to freedom. One that stands out to me the most is when there was a young man. He was probably about 16, 17 years old. He wanted to join the Union Army. I was going with about 10 others. I was leading them through the mountains, and he began to get sick. Every step seemed like it took him an age to do. Eventually, I decided I'm going to have to carry him. I can't leave him there. I've made a promise to him that I was going to get him to Kentucky. I put him on my back. Everybody else in the group said, leave him. He's going to slow us down. But I couldn't. As he was on my back and I was carrying him up the mountains, over Clinch Mountain, over Powell Mountain, he always kept telling me, I want to see freedom before I die. And I wasn't going to let that promise go away. So that's what I did. And eventually, it won over the hearts of the other men in the group. Each one took a turn carrying him. And we finally crossed the Cumberland Mountain, which meant we were in Kentucky. Once in Kentucky, I get him to a Union recruitment camp. He goes into a hospital. He's sick. But he looks up at me before I leave on another trip, and he says, thank you for taking me and getting me to Kentucky before I die. And he passed away not soon after that, before I left. That's what the Union meant to these men. What Union meant to me. It was one of the last great hopes, as Abraham Lincoln said, on this earth. What we don't realize is that during the 1840s, when I was going through the Mexican War, there were wars over in Europe. It was a democratic uprisings. They wanted to take over and throw off their monarchies, and one by one, they were stamped out. They couldn't get freedom. They couldn't get out from under kings and queens. To us, we were that symbol. We were the last great hope. We showed the world that you could come out from under kings and monarchy and queens. That you could form a government by the people, for the people. And so that's what it meant to us. What drove those young men into Kentucky was that very idea. That very idea was what pushed on me and many others. I had a young man traveling up through, and he complained and complained and complained. I got used to the complaining, and I kind of just tuned it out eventually. I didn't want to have to deal with it a lot of times. But eventually he realized why I was doing what I was doing. Everyone, especially when I would go into East Tennessee and gather up 10, 12, up to 20 men, they would always wonder, why is he taking us through the roughest parts? Because the roughest parts are where they're not going to go. The enemy's not going to go where the roughest parts are, and they're going to be by horseback, and we got to go where horses can't. And I remember he had complained, and we were climbing the Clinch Mountain. And it's dead of night. We only traveled at night because if we traveled during the day, that was the easiest way to be spotted. We stayed away from roads. We were up on Clinch Mountain, and I heard it. It was like a gunshot went off. His boot had completely came undone. The heel had fell off. So I took some cloth from my own clothing and tied it around his leg, his boot to his leg, so that he could keep going. And he never complained after that. He saw that I was willing to to sacrifice my own self for his safety and for his ability to get to freedom. I promised that I had made it. Because I'm unique in this war. Most of these pilots that came to East Tennessee were making gentlemen guarantee that they would go to a certain regiment. I didn't care what regiment they went to. These pilots were paid by different regiments to go into East Tennessee and bring men to enlist. I never did that. I made sure that the men knew I was doing this out of the goodness of my own heart rather than for me to get paid. And that made them feel a lot more comfortable with me than they would have if they had been with any other pilot along these mountains. So that's what was my intention. And I thank goodness there was plenty of people along my journey that helped me out. I remember I was getting hungry somewhere in the vicinity between Clinch Mountain and around Morristown. I was getting extremely hungry. I had no food on me. And I went up to this lady's house. She comes out onto the porch. She doesn't say a word to me other than, come and get something to eat. She didn't ask me my name, didn't ask me what affiliation I was with, what army I was with. She only asked, told me to get something to eat. I came in, she said not a word, she fixed me a meal, and she didn't even look out the window to make sure someone wasn't coming. She handed me a little bit of food to take with me, and all she said was, go out the back door. And that way I knew in her own way, she was braver than me. Because if she had been found out that she had helped me, the bridge burner, she probably would have been thrown in jail or worse. I tried to pay her with some money that I had I put it on the table. She took one finger and pushed it back. Said, I don't sell supper. It's not the only time. There was an older lady that I came to her house, and she was very welcoming, but again, didn't ask me what army I was with, didn't ask me where I was going. She simply brought me in, and she gave me 4 days of rations. 4 whole days. I had a haversack full of food. I tried to pay her with $5, which she did take, but you should have seen her face when I gave her some money that she could use in this horrible time of war. She probably didn't have that food to give, but she was willing to risk her life to help me and the Union. And that stuck with me. These people were in a dire situation. They weren't living lavishly. They were just trying to get by. And the men that I took into Kentucky were brave, but I swear the women that helped me along my way were even braver because they had to stay. They had to remain in enemy country this entire time. One of the saddest moments I ever witnessed during the war was when I heard that a young man had been conscripted, forced into the Confederate Army. Some Confederates had came to his house. He refused to go, and they shot him right there in his front yard. They wouldn't allow his parents to even touch the body. So he had to lay there in the front yard. When I heard this, I went to the home, snuck into the home. They knew I was a Union man. I knew they were Union sympathizers because their son didn't want to join the Confederate Army. And in the dead of night, I helped his father and some of his siblings carry the body up the hillside, out of way of any Confederates. And in a silent funeral, we had a funeral for that young man. And you'll never have a more saddened sight than the mother of that child holding the Bible and tears running down her face, hitting the Bible as she was there, just kind of rending her hands. That's what war did to this area. That's what war caused and how horrible it was. And what for? For secession, for us to bring secession to this land, for us to leave the Union, the land that we had been part of for 77 years before, we had been a part of, and they had taken it away from us. Now, things weren't always sad. We had some good times along the trail. It wasn't a horrible thing. I know that every time I passed a cedar thicket, I had to tip my hat to the cedar thicket because that's what saved me the first time. That was my dear friend, was the cedar thicket and the laurel thickets. Also, the mountains themselves, they were the ones that allowed me to do this. If I had to pilot soldiers back and forth hundreds of miles, I couldn't have done it in an open land. It was these mountains that allowed me to do that. Those are my friends. But I was taking some gentlemen up into Kentucky once, and one of the hardest places to get through was the Powell Valley because it's so wide. It goes from Powell Mountain to the Cumberland Mountain. It's an extremely wide valley. It's easy to be spotted, and so you travel by night. You try to stick within tree lines to be able to avoid being seen. It's one of the worst times, but we were getting extremely hungry, and so no one wanted to venture out because, again, I had taught them we don't want to get out into view of anyone. And so what I end up doing, I end up sneaking up to a house and trying to capture a chicken. Now, you've never had any fun in your life than trying to chase a chicken and your friends laughing at you the entire time because you can't catch this little chicken running around the yard. I don't know how many times I fell down, don't know how many times I had grabbed it and it got away from me, but eventually I wore it down. I couldn't catch it, but I could tire it out. And so finally I captured it, and before anybody could get out the door of the house, I ran out with the chicken, and we had chicken for dinner that night. We barely even cooked it. We were starving. We built a small little fire that couldn't be detectable because I normally didn't allow any fires. And I did these journeys through the wintertime, fall, spring, and summer. I didn't allow any fires normally, just because of how dangerous it could be. And so these gentlemen that came with me would go into Kentucky, and when I brought them in there, they joined various regiments. Sometimes they joined Tennessee Union regiments. Sometimes they joined Kentucky regiments, Ohio, Indiana, but many of them came back in the form of an army of liberation. But I remember one gentleman who I actually helped escape. And he was so grateful. And I'm on my way back into East Tennessee about a year later. And I get captured. I did get captured once. And I was brought to an officer to eventually hang me because they thought they had a bridge burner on their hands. That officer that they brought me to was the same man that I had rescued before. And he told his soldiers, he's not a bridge burner, he's not a unionist, just let him go. And that saved my life that day. But I did bring a weapon with me. The best weapon that I had during this entire war. Anyone want to see the weapon? It killed no man, but it saved my life more times than I can count. So, if I can get this, there we go. Simply a string and some buttons. That's how I ended up saving my life more times than I can count. I portrayed myself as a peddler of thread, thimbles, buttons, and I always carried them on me. I never carried a weapon because a weapon meant that I'd be a soldier, or at least up to no good. So I always carried me some thread, buttons, in nice substantial quantities. Not only can these be used to sell to ladies and people that just need thread on a daily basis, but they're also toys. It's called a button buzzer. So you can wind it up and kids can play with it. I can't tell you how many times I've got information from people just by selling things to people. I'd go up to a home, say I'm going to be selling some thread and needles and buttons. Oh, they'd welcome me in. They'd buy stuff from me. And as the whole time that I'm playing with the kids like this, the whole time I'm making sales, I'm asking, how many Confederate soldiers have been coming through lately? I need to know if I'm going to be blocked on this road or not. And they'd always give me plenty of information. And so the best weapon I ever had, the best weapon I ever found, was simply some buttons and some thread. That was my weapon. I didn't carry one. Very seldomly would I have kept one. Again, if they'd have caught me, they'd have known I was up to no good. But a little peddler of some thread Never paid no mind to me. I also did one other trick. I would carry a shovel around with me and ask about caves. Does anyone know what caves have in them? Saltpeter, yeah. Bat poop. You get salt. You get salt. That's what it is. Yeah. You dig up that dirt and you can make saltpeter. Saltpeter, sulfur, and you make gunpowder out of saltpeter, a little bit of sulfur, and a little bit of charcoal, and you can make black powder. And the Confederacy had what's called a niter bureau. They needed black powder, and so they would go to homes and say, hey, if you'll dig up your chicken lot, because that's where you're going to get the nitrites out to make the saltpeter, we'll give you money for that. And so it was no stretch that someone would be looking for caves where you can find saltpeter as well. And so I would go around the roads and asking people, hey, where's the saltpeter mine, or where's the caves at, so I can find saltpeter. Most people didn't pay me any mind, although I did run into one gentleman, and I could tell right away that he was up to no good. I go up to him and I ask him about saltpeter and any caves that might be around, and I could just tell with his voice he was asking for a little too much information. And so I didn't give him much, and then I went up the road just a little bit, just till I was out of sight, and then I slipped into the tree line and doubled back on myself and came back behind him, and I watched him. I just watched him for a while, and he didn't move. He was watching where I was going, trying to see where I was going, not knowing that I was actually watching him the whole time. So I had to be able to think quick on my feet, and that's exactly what I did, especially when there are dogs after me. I love a good dog, but my goodness, they were the bane of my existence for 4 years when they'd come after me. I had about 12 men with me one time when a whole pack came after us. They were hunting dogs by the Confederates. And I'm trying to go up to places where dogs can't go, higher up into the mountains. Well, we come to a creek, and that was the best way to get away from them, was to get into the creek. And so we traveled for about 2 miles inside the creek in December. The men complained, but I said it's better than being dead. And they agreed. That's not the only time we had to hang out in a creek. One time we actually had to spend about an hour in the creek. Thank goodness it wasn't as cold, but we had to go up to about our necks inside a little cove in a creek to stay away from any enemy forces. A couple of times I was on my own, and because every time I have to come back into East Tennessee, I'm usually coming alone. And some cavalry came after me. They had spotted me. And so again, as soon as I get spotted, or I think I've been spotted, I climb higher. And so I try to get high up into the mountains. And when I do, I turn around, I finally find myself into this little crag of rocks, and I look over and I get to watch them look for me. And that's always been a very fun thing for me to do, because I like seeing the confusion in their faces. But it's not that I'm taking it easy. I'm just pretty comfortable after about 4 years that I was doing fairly well at what I was pretty good at what I did. Didn't take any unnecessary chances. But I did this piloting for 2 years, 2 solid years. The time of liberation came in September of 1863, when Ambrose Burnside led the Army of Liberation from Kentucky into East Tennessee and helped save us. I remember watching this take place right outside of Knoxville. He marched into Knoxville in early September, and I remember watching this, and I could feel the presence. If you think it's crazy, I think I could have felt the presence of Abraham Lincoln smiling when that happened, because when Ambrose Burnside captured Knoxville, he captured Morristown, he kept working his way around, and that meant that we were safe. We were finally able to breathe. Once that happens, my job is essentially over. The Union Army has taken over East Tennessee. I finally join a regiment myself. I feel comfortable enough that I don't need to bring people from Tennessee into Kentucky. There's already Union forces in there, and they're not leaving. So I join a regiment, and I fight for the next 2 years with a regiment. And nothing was more beneficial or more heartwarming to me than saving all these East Tennesseans. It was that drive that idea for Union, that love for the United States that led me back and traveling hundreds and hundreds of miles through those 2 years to save more men that would have been possibly killed, wounded, or even tortured on their way trying to, as the Confederates try to round up these East Tennesseans and these Unions. So thank you for hearing my stories. I hope you enjoyed them. Again, we didn't talk about any big battles, but sometimes the biggest battles, they're not fought on a battlefield. They're fought in these mountains, in the hearts of the men that travel from this area into Kentucky. Thank you.